Everyone find their seats and get started. It's so nice to see people made it through the weather. We're looking forward to a nice evening. My name is Ben Goldstein. I'm the director of the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder at CAMH, and it's a pleasure to have you here tonight. I wanted to start off by reading a land acknowledgement to contextualize this evening. CAMH is situated on lands that have been occupied by First Nations for millennia, lands rich in civilizations with knowledge of medicine, architecture, technology, and extensive trade routes through the Americas. In 1860, the site of CAMH appeared in the Colonial Records Office of the British Crown as the council grounds of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, as they were known at the time. Today, Toronto is covered by the Toronto Purchase, Treaty Number 13 of 1805 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Toronto is now home to a vast diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis who enrich this city. CAMH is committed to reconciliation. We will honor the land through programs and places that reflect and respect its heritage. We will embrace the healing traditions of the ancestors and weave them into our caring practices. We will create new relationships and partnerships with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and share the land and protect it for future generations. So welcome. This is an annual event for the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder. We have had a delay over the past couple of years and are just absolutely thrilled for tonight's lineup, in particular our guest of honor and keynote speaker, Margaret Trudeau. This morning and through the afternoon, we had our first research symposium and hope that this will become an annual tradition leading up to our public information night as we have this evening. It's now my honor to introduce our CEO of CAMH, Tracy MacArthur.
Thanks, Ben. It's so wonderful to be here. And I wanted to share that this is actually our first event in this beautiful auditorium. And we're thrilled to be able to host you all here this evening and gather together, many of us anyway, in person in one of our new buildings here today. Thank you so much, Ben, Dr. Goldstein, for inviting me to be here to speak this evening. You know, we've really come a long way in overcoming stigma associated with a number of mental illnesses, and certainly through the pandemic period, that's really focused our attention on mental health. But illnesses that are more complex, such as bipolar disorder, remain largely understood. And this is particularly true when it comes to our youth and how we can support our youth. So although bipolar disorder is the fourth leading cause of disability in youth, it remains greatly under-researched, and I'm so thrilled that we were able to add the research symposium work to our day today. So the remarkable productivity and discoveries at CAMH's Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder serves a crucial role in advancing knowledge and optimizing treatment for this condition. The center is home to Canada's leading clinical research team in youth bipolar disorder. It's one of the top centers in the world. It was established at Sunnybrook in 2009, and we're so thrilled that it's now here at CAMH and moved here in September of 2020 and now celebrating the 12-year anniversary. A real fundamental and distinguishing feature of the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder is its focus on integrating mind, brain, and heart. And this focus on bipolar vascular connection offers patients and families hope, and hope is so crucial. I have never heard a patient story about recovery that doesn't involve and center on hope. It offers hope for a future where youth bipolar disorder is better understood, where novel treatments and options are available, and of course, where stigma is diminished. So after a very long 2-year hiatus due to the pandemic, and we hope it won't, this year will be the end and we'll be able to move forward. Today marks the renewal of the center's annual public education event, and for the first time, of course, paired with the research symposium. This annual education event is a reflection of the center's mission and dedication to sharing knowledge and research about youth bipolar disorder in order to demystify as well as increase awareness about the condition. So today, on World Bipolar Day, I would really like to warmly welcome you to this important event. I hope you will find this evening informative, interesting, and most importantly, inspiring. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks very much, Tracy. It now gives me great pleasure, and it's an honor to introduce to you Adam Jordan. Adam Jordan is a researcher, speaker, and health enthusiast. He holds an honors BSc in kinesiology and is currently doing a second degree in nutrition and food to ultimately become a dietitian, personal trainer, and researcher examining the intersection between nutrition and mental health. So Adam has been involved with the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder over the past year as a youth with lived experience, focused on knowledge translation, educating, demystifying. And I have to say that it's just been great to watch his increasing interest in this subject. A year ago, hadn't been involved in these sorts of activities and now is about to present to us this evening. He sits on the CAMH Youth Advisory Group, on the CYBD, the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder Youth Advisory Council, is a research and content development coordinator for the Luminate Mental Health Conference series, and recently published a first author paper in exercise and nutrition. Adam, thank you very much for being with us tonight, and we look forward to hearing your comments. Come on up.
Well, thank you, Dr. Goldstein. I almost teared up a little bit there. Wow. As a young boy, I wanted to be a hero, but as I grew up, I didn't develop the ability to fly. I can't even touch the bottom of the backboard on the basketball net. But in university, I took a course on the hero's journey, and I think maybe there's some aspects of this story that can be applicable to the hero's journey. So allow me to play the hero as I take you all through this tale. Every story begins with an absentation, something or someone goes amiss. And for me, that absentation was a part of myself, the lack of proper neurotransmitters and mental and physical function. See, when most kids get injured, they go to their parents for help, but not me. I was too tough for that. In grade 2, I was reaching for a box of chocolates in the pantry above the stove. And as I came down in my youthful glee, I clamped my arm down onto the unsuspectingly burning hot stove. And although my arm bubbled up for the next week, I didn't ask for help. I just wore a long sleeve shirt to cover it up. So if even a physical burning was insufficient reason for me to ask for help, you can only imagine my difficulties once the internal wildfires found in the misfiring of my brain started to rage on. And those early difficulties existed in the form of OCD and social anxiety. Yes, social anxiety, that disorder that makes you afraid of, well, people. And what's that other one? Oh yes, speaking in front of large audiences. Yes, that's the one. It makes your armpits drip like a leaky faucet. I think I'm doing okay. And there was a can of worms rearing to be opened, and year over year, more and more worms were packed into that can until the age of 15, where I just let it all out, and I broke down in front of my mother, and we went to sick kids, to the emergency room, and from that time on, I got treatment for OCD, social anxiety, and depression. And for anyone who's never experienced depression, whether themselves or secondhand, here's an entry from my 2015 grade 12 journal to encapsulate it. I'm quite depressed. I feel like I don't have any friends. I feel like I want to move away from home. I feel like I need a change to my life. I don't enjoy any normal activities. I hate school. I don't want to talk to people. All I want to do is sleep. When I sleep, I don't want to stop sleeping. I don't want to smile. I don't even like food. What's the point anymore? And despite these difficulties, I made it to grade 12 Wasaga beach trip, our graduation trip. And in the flurry of marijuana and alcohol and a medication which can exacerbate mania, my mood was increased and appetite for sleep non-existent, and I couldn't stop talking about all the great discoveries my brain was coming to. And there was an island across the water that I thought I could swim to, even though I only took swimming lessons up to level 7. And when I returned home, I didn't really get the proper treatment and care that I needed to become healthy again. And I went from this depressed kid from that excerpt there to being voted the happiest person on the trip. So you can see the difference there. And I kind of regretted that I wasn't able to go away for university like many of my friends out of town. So I went to York University here for a degree in kinesiology and health sciences. But in first year, I went up to Laurier for homecoming, and it was the similar culprits as the first time. And mania can seem fun, but in the wake of increased energy and mood lies destructive behaviors and a disconnect with everyday life. When I returned home, I didn't want to start studying like most of my friends. I just wanted to have fun. And eventually my parents took me to the emergency room, and I got admitted to the psych ward for 2 weeks. And the psych ward was precisely as I had suspected it. It had the dark flickering lights and the rats running across the hall and the patients chained to the bed trying to get out. No, it was just another wing of the hospital with a meal plan people complained about and time for yoga and activities. And my roommate and I, we would actually write raps and rap to each other to pass the time. And we'd also wrestle, even though I was 30 pounds heavier than him and I would win every single time. I suppose it got our energy out and passed the time. So as the hero's story goes, there's now a difficult task proposed, a new diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And so what follows is the period of the story where the hero gathers his tools and starts training and begins to prepare for battle. Now, every hero needs a donor, and the donor is the person who gives the hero a magical tool or weapon, something they can use to be successful. And for me, the donor held the name of Dr. Benjamin Goldstein and all the life-changing staff at the CYPD. Though it was easy to grow impatient because the medications I was taking, the lithium, helped to balance my mood, but it also gave me side effects like hand tremors, which was not ideal for my anatomy dissection courses, and it raised my blood pressure and gave me acne all over. So more medication was prescribed to deal with the side effects of this medication. And at this point, I was in a neck and neck race with my grandparents to see who could be taking more medication. And as a competitive lad, I'm happy to say I won. And so this is where I also developed my superpower. And the superpower actually came from my biggest deficit. And because as a kid, I wasn't able to swallow pills, but now I was challenged with all these pills I had to take. And I didn't like taking them in 2 shots. I like to take them all at once. So I would get these, if anyone's taken lithium, you know how big those like 1,200 milligram pills are. So I had lithium, lamictal, diuretic, acne medication, fish oil, throwing it all down in 1 shot. And it wasn't quite the superpower I expected as a child, but beggars can't be choosers. So. But my kidney didn't like the lithium. So the nephrologist told me as I lay in a panic of sweat that we were either going to have to do a kidney biopsy or go off of the lithium. And in my mind, a kidney biopsy was like way worse than it actually was. I thought they were going to just cut everything up and take the kidneys out and I don't know, fry them on a pan or something. So I decided to go off of the lithium. So comes a higher risk of mania. But then later, Dr. Goldstein recommended another medication, Seroquel. And I got a little scared because its name was a little, it was atypical antipsychotic. So I decided to do a little bit of my own research. And we all know how well that can go, doing your own research. But the internet told me I was going to turn into a zombie and gain 100 pounds of weight. And so I asked Dr. Goldstein, is it going to turn me into a zombie? And he said no. Though I was honestly still a little suspicious he was trying to turn me into a zombie. But it didn't turn me into a zombie, and I think I'm doing okay on the weight part. And it actually started working, and so did the fluoxetine many years later. I believe that everyone needs a specific dose of care and therapy that they need to become a successful human being. And the more disorders, the more difficulties you may have, the higher that dose of care seems to be. And for me, medication and talk therapy weren't enough for me to feel my best. So I had to keep training, keep learning, keep getting the skills. And any book on self-improvement I had to get my hands on philosophy and stoicism. I learned and studied the art of meditation, meditating 30 minutes to an hour a day. And although it wasn't really recommended to me, nutrition actually helped a lot with my mental health. So I tried to learn more about this, and I realized the foods that I ate, and if I ate certain foods at certain times, my mental health was better. And I would track my foods and compare it to my moods to help regulate my circadian rhythms and sleep. And I started researching as much as I could into nutrition. And this ultimately led me to the program in now in nutrition and food, and hopefully a future in that. And exercise was also one of the greatest tools at my disposal. I would go to the gym or go on the track and tell myself that not only am I lifting the weights or running on the track for myself, but for anyone who's ever experienced mental health difficulties, including people in this room, including people listening at home, including people who existed thousands of years ago, couldn't get the care and help that we have today, and a youth at 17 years old being diagnosed. I'm doing it for them. And so this is how I gained my sense of purpose. My purpose was to learn everything I could about health and become as healthy as I could be, as to ultimately come back and help other people, other youth experiencing mental health difficulties with their mental health. And my journey was non-linear. You can imagine a visualization of me walking up a flight of stairs with a yo-yo. And the flight of stairs represent the passing years, while the yo-yo represents my health. And so perhaps there's a point at year 3 where the low of the yo-yo is where it is at year 1. But as the years goes on, as the year goes on, my health gets better and better as the yo-yo goes up the stairs. But something was still lacking. And it's an important part of any hero's journey. See, at this point, I was keeping everything to myself, and no hero can go at it alone without allies, without teammates. So I found these allies in collaborating with fellow youth at CYBD and the Youth Advisory Council. I got accepted to the Youth Advisory Group at CAMH, working on projects in Ontario and Canada, and research projects and policy and all the such. I started developing mental health workshops for undergraduate students with the Illuminate Mental Health Conference series. And in all of these activities, it was quite amazing to be in a place where lived experience was actually an asset and not a liability. And that had a significant benefit on my own mental health. And I did a Yale fellowship on lived experience leadership, doing a project in mental health. And the final leg of the hero's journey is the return home. And archetypally, it's the wedding to the woman in the dazzling dress. And although Margaret Trudeau, you're looking radiant tonight, my return home comes not to a woman, but in a speech here at World Bipolar Day 2022 in front of an audience here and listening of loving, generous, caring friends, family, doctors, researchers. This is the greatest gift that I could be given, is to speak here and possibly inspire someone else on their own hero's journey. Thank you. Take a picture? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you.
Just thank you, Adam, so much. For a hero to have a superpower that inspires others and lifts others, I think is what all we could hope for. And we hope that we take the honor that you've given us with your comments today and play it forward with a lot of energy and determination to join you on the same mission. So thank you so much. So we've done this event, this evening event on an annual basis, I think eight or 9 times. And we've always started with an individual with lived experience, a youth or a parent. And I think you can understand why. I've actually never seen Adam speak in public before, and I having trouble getting my head around how well he just did. I think that was beyond wildest dreams and just so articulate and funny. And we'll talk more about it later, I'm sure. I just wanted to take a moment before we get started to thank our team at the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder. Danielle Omrin has led a crew of, Alana, Diana, Michaela, but also the entire team of about 20 who have spent the better part of the last 2 weeks working furiously on every tech aspect, gracious hosting of our speakers and our out-of-town guests. We're honored to host researchers from Australia, from the Netherlands, from Spain, from the United States, and from as far away as Halifax as well. And what I'm hoping to do in the next half hour is to give you an overview. In future years, what we will do is have thematic evenings focused on specific types of treatment or specific questions that come up. But because it's been a while, because this is our first evening at CAMH, I wanted to give an overall overview that introduces CAMH and our new community to the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder, our mission, and our team. As I mentioned earlier today, we had the CYBD World Bipolar Day Symposium. It was headlined by our keynote speakers, Dr. Boris Burmeyer, a mentor of mine from the University of Pittsburgh, who spoke about the early course of bipolar disorder among offspring of parents with bipolar disorder. We heard from Melissa Del Bello, looked at the integration of brain imaging and novel therapeutic or treatment approaches. And then Roger McIntyre, who I'm grateful is here this evening as well, who talked about the mood metabolic therapeutic nexus. World Bipolar Day was selected from the date of March 30th by virtue of this being the date of birth of Vincent van Gogh, as you see depicted in that picture. And here is our quartet of inspirers, invigorators, organizers. You heard a little bit about stigma from Tracy, and I think for many of us in the room, this may sound, maybe hard to get our head around. How can there be stigma against an illness we know to be so true and so real and so valid? But there is still stigma. And in fact, even within our own professional organizations, whether they be child psychiatry organizations or bipolar disorder organizations, there remains a peculiar skepticism and doubt about early onset bipolar disorder. So I just wanted to flag these data from Dr. Burmeyer, which we've, in my view, is the most impactful paper in our field over the past quarter of a century. And what Dr. Burmeyer found in a large sample of several hundred offspring of parents with and without bipolar disorder is looking at polygenic risk scores. So these are a conglomeration of multiple genetic markers that together confer risk for given conditions. You have them for cancer, for heart disease, diabetes, and psychiatric illnesses as well. And if you look along the bottom line here, you see the bipolar disorder polygenic risk score, the major depressive disorder, the schizophrenia, and the ADHD polygenic risk scores. In offspring of parents with bipolar disorder depicted in pink or red, and the offspring of community control patients, individuals depicted in blue. And as you can see, the only significant difference was for bipolar disorder. So there is something highly familial about bipolar disorder. We know this. We also know that it's genetic. And now we know that this is true not only in adults, but in youth. So the higher their genetic risk was also an influencer of them having bipolar disorder. While these things may sound self-evident, these are foundations upon which we can build in bringing more of society on board with the idea that, like any other major medical condition, this is something that is partially inherited and partially environmental and equally valid despite it not having physical manifestations. We hope to continue that line of work during the years ahead at CAMH. In terms of providing context for early onset bipolar disorder, you may wonder why focus on youth? We know this is a lifespan condition that affects adults as well. If you ask adults with bipolar disorder when their illness started, between 1/3 and 2/3 will tell you that it started prior to adulthood. 1/3 is in community samples that are not necessarily selected for being hospital-based. And if you looked at an institution like CAMH or other area hospitals, you would find that fully 2/3 will tell you that their illness started in childhood or adolescence. In such cases, they have higher rates of co-occurring conditions like anxiety and substance use disorders. They have more episodes, more symptoms within episodes, more psychosis, more suicidality, regardless of how you define perniciousness or severity of bipolar disorder. If it starts early, it follows a more severe track. And this continues into adulthood. So even in studies looking at middle-aged adults, asked when their illness started, followed a little farther into middle age. Those who say they had early onset continue to have a more symptomatic course of illness. Now, what I say is based on adults that are in their 40s 10 years ago. Our hope is, in echoing Adam's comments, that looking forward, we can offer individuals more so that they do not have the same story and so that they have a story that's defined by recovery and sustained recovery. And it's these types of partnerships that enable us to realize that dream and to accelerate it. These are Canadian data. This is published by Nicole Kozloff, who's a psychiatrist and clinician scientist at CAMH, and published this during her residency. This was based on a community sample. So this means that you didn't go to a hospital inpatient unit, you went to a general population sample, and it happened to be that there was 150 or so teenagers in this community sample that had bipolar disorder. What you can see here is a couple of facts that I want to highlight. One is there's a disproportionate number of women, and this is different than any other time in the life cycle. So middle-aged adults, older adults, and even in those studies that have looked at children, find an equivalent male to female sex ratio. Whereas in adolescence, and uniquely in adolescence, this is disproportionately affecting females. And this is something that we are interested in discovering more about, but it's a fact that I think is important. We see high rates of anxiety in this sample, high rates of substance use disorder, and more than 50% with suicidal ideation or suicide attempts. So that sounds like a sample that you would find in a hospital, not one that you would find in the community. But because it was a community sample, you see that less than 50% report having had any form of mental health treatment at all. That doesn't mean lithium and Seroquel and fluoxetine. It means counseling or talking to your family doctor about it, or anything for that matter. So in this sample at this time, and you could say 2010 is a while ago, things have changed a little bit, but not enough. And even so, I think 2010 would be considered the modern era. And yet imagine the complexity of this clinical picture accompanied by more than 50% not seeking treatment. So I think we have to embrace the possibility that aside from barriers to care in terms of the system and access, there are also barriers to care in terms of stigma. And that is really an area of focus for the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder and part of the motivation for integrating brain, mind, and body. How did the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder begin, and how did it evolve? After my residency, there was very little research in Canada on youth bipolar disorder. I picked up a book at a conference about pediatric bipolar disorder, found it enthralling, looked into the handful of sites in the world that were studying this, and landed in Pittsburgh with Boris Burmacher and the Child and Adolescent Bipolar Services Clinic. And they have that cute cab, which is a really nice icon for their clinic. And what I learned from Boris was, first of all, that no matter what you're doing, patients come first. Doesn't matter if 90% of your time is administrative service and research, patients come first. And that was something that I saw modeled in a world-leading researcher. I also saw that clinical care and research are to be integrated and blended and almost indistinguishable. For the Research Ethics Board, a little bit distinguishable, but almost indistinguishable. And I learned that there. We brought that philosophy to Sunnybrook in 2009. And there we had the opportunity to grow. And things happened at Sunnybrook that could only have happened at Sunnybrook in terms of our ability to establish, nurture, and foster relationships with cardiologists, neurologists, ophthalmologists, and anesthesiologists, which I'll talk about later, which enabled us to really bring meaning to this brain-body connection in bipolar disorder. And it was really quite fun, exciting, and also validating for myself and on behalf of our patients and our stakeholders that these adult physicians in other branches of medicine felt inspired to join us and dedicate meaningfully of their time and energy. And I think evidenced here by the cover of the Sunnybrook magazine at the time several years ago, to my knowledge, the first time that a psychiatric topic or individual was featured on the cover. And as you can see here, do you see what we see? And this was a study about retinal vascular photography and the insights that it provides us to youth bipolar disorder. I thought they did a great job with this image and this caption. And we had an excellent run at Sunnybrook for just over a decade, and are very, very fortunate that we've had the opportunity to move to CAMH and begin the process of amplifying. By that, I mean making this really the leading youth bipolar clinical research group in the world is our goal, and to impact patient care and bedside decisions, public discourse, scientific discovery. And we're just absolutely thrilled and grateful. I saw Deborah Gillis walk in. This has been really an opportunity born of a lot of thought and conscious, deliberate investment from CAMH's part on a topic that's dear to our hearts, and as Tracy said earlier, greatly neglected relative to its impact on society. Tonight, we have an opportunity to acknowledge the contributions and the partnerships of the Mood Disorders Association of Ontario, Hope and Me. This is our province's leading consumer advocacy organization. And although Andrew Comp is not presenting this evening, he presents on an annual basis, and we look forward to welcoming the MDAO back in future years as an active partner with booths and staff and unmasked personnel in hopefully next year. What I've put up in this slide is when we met Andrew and Anne-Marie McDonald, who's their executive director and CEO, we wanted to create a partnership that reduced suspicion around research and increased integration and participation, and extend that even beyond people that were help seeking. And the sentiment that came back to us was the idea that clinicians and patient advocates were somewhat suspicious or dubious of the intentions of researchers. And I asked Andrew, I said, well, have you done a survey? Have you done a survey of your constituents? He said, we haven't. I said, would you be open to it? He said, sure, we'll do it. So we crafted 4 questions about research, about people's concerns about research, about their interest in being involved in research. And Andrew, in a subsequent year, presented the results of this survey, and the resounding answer as to whether people were interested and saw hope in what research could bring to their lives. The answer was yes. And so that was really the genesis of an ongoing partnership over the past 10 years. Wanted to emphasize our patient, family, and community engagement. This is something we've been doing kind of off the side of the desk, if you will, for some time, organically based on our intentions and our inclination towards building relationships, but increasingly driven by best practices and a lot of support from EENet at CAMH and others. So we established just over a year ago, Youth Advisory Council. In January 2021, we have 6 active youth advisors. We've met as a group 9 times over the past year. These are business meetings. These are action-oriented meetings. And these are fun meetings. And I think what's unique about this, aside from the fact that it's specifically focused on youth bipolar disorder, is that this is researchers, clinicians, patients with lived experience, all who know each other in those capacities, working together in knowledge translation. And I think that there's excellent examples of research and excellent examples of patient engagement. It's very uncommon that it's all the same people that have been working together. And I think that's given us an advantage in terms of our ability to turn the crank on some of our goals. For example, we hope to soon publish a for youth by youth pamphlet, booklet, if you will, close to a book, that's going to share narratives, first person perspectives on the ups, the downs, recovery of having bipolar disorder. And we're really excited to be able to share that with you. We won't wait till next year. We will send around an electronic copy to everyone in attendance and to those who are online. As I mentioned, knowledge translation, we are initiating planning with CAMH, with EENet, which is a group that has this as their primary mandate and has given us a lot of skills and approaches and new perspectives. We have ongoing collaborations, as I mentioned, with Hope and Me, and also with CREST BD, which is an organization led by Aaron Mikulak at the University of British Columbia, also partnering with youth to get the word out on youth bipolar disorder, specifically worldwide. Our research has increasingly integrated youth and their parents, and has begun to do so from the outset. So it started with us envisioning an idea for a grant, then inviting a patient, a youth patient, and a parent, and then it got to the point of us now brainstorming in advance with youth and their parents. Our studies now include consultation forums. For example, I'll mention to you an exercise intervention study where we ask people about their experiences and take that feedback back to the drawing table with great consideration. We have youth and parent representatives as research collaborators, as co-authors, listed on CIHR grant submissions and on papers that are submitted. And this is, I have to say, one of the most cherished and enjoyable transitions that we've had in terms of that type of partnership, that type of public, put a name on it partnership that I think really moves people. And then we have our wall of hope, and I've given you a couple of examples here, which is the use of art as a medium for inspiring messages of hope and wisdom. These are youth. So the idea is that when you come into a clinic and you're frightened for your child, or you're frightened about what your parents are going to say and what's going to come, that you see this wall with images, and I've only put 3 up, but I think in your pamphlet, you see a photograph of the wall that is really, we're going to install it here shortly. And it gives the sense that this road has been walked before by those who have the energy and the idea to share these messages of hope. And we hope that it gives people some comfort on those first frightening and intimidating days. With that, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and give a sequence of fast facts, research snapshots from CYBD. These are not necessarily thematically linked, but what they give you is a taster menu of the types of things that come from clinically oriented research. Some you'll see clearly as clinically relevant in the near term, some more aspirational. So a recent paper from our group by Joyce Jiang and colleagues showed that there's concerns about medicines called, Adam mentioned zombie. So there's concerns about medicines causing cognitive side effects, memory, attention span. And there's really not a lot of data in bipolar disorder. It's more well established in schizophrenia. And what we found was that lithium and second generation or atypical antipsychotics among youth with bipolar disorder, at least in the 200 youth in our study, was not associated with meaningful differences in cognition. And so I think this is an important fact to share with people so that they can venture on this journey with a little bit less trepidation, a little bit more confidence. People don't want to keep on taking my word for it, right? We've got to show them data, Adam. A recent study we published found that blood levels of inflammation predict future course of symptoms. And you could say, well, so could asking someone how they feel today. Well, controlling for their age, sex, race, socioeconomic status, and their current and recent symptoms, we found that simple, readily measured blood tests are independently contributing to our ability to predict the burden of mood symptoms over the subsequent 3 months and to predict time to recovery. Now, this is work in its infancy, but this is the type of thing I'm hoping for within my career. If we can see a circumstance where, like other branches of medicine, we had something other than a conversation, an observation, and taking a history, which I think are really important tools. But on their own, it's a tough fight. So we really want to add objective measurements to increase our ability to predict. When can somebody come off of a treatment? When is it a good time to go back on a treatment? Right now, we wait for symptoms to emerge. That's all that we have. We found that the reward network in the brain is relevant to multiple different considerations. So cannabis use is associated with dysfunction in the brain's reward network. Obesity, suicidality is related to reward dysfunction. And so what that tells us is targeting this topic, targeting this circuit of the brain has multiple potential benefits. We found that, like in adults, anything that is similar between youth and adults with bipolar disorder builds more validation of bipolar disorder. So we said, okay, well, this is how I found the topic of medical comorbidity, by the way, is that there was controversy 15 years ago when I came to the topic, and I thought, well, let's find something that's really unexpected, that's clearly established in adults, and bring it to youth. And if it's there in youth as well, that'll tell us something. So I started with obesity. And as we know, this has gone increasingly towards other vascular measurements, but migraine headaches as well. And what's interesting in this study was that non-migraine headaches were not associated with having bipolar disorder. So there's no difference in the rate of regular headaches, even impairing headaches among youth with and without bipolar disorder, but migraine type headaches specifically. And finally, Professor Trevor Young, who's here with us tonight, who's been a world-leading researcher on energy metabolism, on mitochondrial function. This is something that we've also found in youth. So even at an average age of 16 and a half, an average of 2 years into illness, we see that the cell's energy supply, the mitochondria, have dysfunction, markers of dysfunction. And this is associated with the severity of depression symptoms already in youth. And so these bridges between adult bipolar disorder and early onset youth bipolar disorder bolster us. So I wanted to switch gears now to the vascular bipolar connection. And how did we get here? These are data from a large-scale US population study. And what's advantageous of a population-based study is that, unfortunately, most people in society with bipolar disorder go untreated. We hope to make meaning out of that by doing such things as what we've done with this paper. But most people with bipolar disorder either don't get any treatment or get antidepressants without a mood stabilizer. But that does give an advantage, which is that the medicines that could potentially aggravate obesity, as Adam mentioned, or cholesterol changes, they're absent in over 80% of these individuals. You also have thousands of patients with bipolar disorder, so you can control statistically for whatever you like. So what we found was adults with bipolar disorder type 1 had new onset of heart disease in this study 17 years earlier than adults without mood disorders. So imagine, this is a sample that's on average 42 years old. Detectable symptomatic heart disease happened 17 years earlier. When did this process go awry? And I would argue that we're seeing evidence, at least in adolescence, And this suggests the need for integrating heart health, not in one's 40s, but when one is 15 and 17, and building a integrated model of care as we would see in diabetes with a psychologist and a nutritionist and a exercise counselor and perhaps a psychiatrist as well, but that not have that be the only foundation of treatment. And this association was also observed for bipolar disorder type 2 and for what we call unipolar depression or major depressive disorder, but the extent appears to be larger in bipolar disorder than in most other conditions and exceeds what can be explained by smoking, alcohol use, blood pressure, obesity. And why do I highlight those considerations? It's because in most conversations someone like me has with the public in research settings and clinical settings, people say, of course there's higher rates of heart disease. People with bipolar disorder are more likely to be sedentary, they eat more carbohydrate-rich diets, they smoke more, and it's dismissed. And I don't think that there's cause to dismiss it. Sure, those factors are important. If you have bipolar disorder, it's a great idea to come, to try to reduce your alcohol use, to reduce your smoking, but that's not the whole story. And to separate out underlying causes, whether they be genetic or other mechanisms, is to minimize bipolar disorder and its connection with heart disease. So it took several years of petitioning and following a lot of due process and jumping through a lot of hoops, but we were able to publish a scientific statement in this journal Circulation, the leading cardiology journal for the American Heart Association. And this was something that really brought not just bipolar heart connection under the spotlight, but youth bipolar under the spotlight. So this paper was published in 2015. So imagine you're a cardiologist, you pick up the journal Circulation, you're used to reading about coronary artery bypass graphs, cardiovascular risk prevention, and you're seeing major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder predisposed youth. Like, as my patients would say, wait, what are we talking about here? So this led to a lot of media coverage, 103 million media imprints, impressions, so whether TV or web, Forbes, NBC News, Reuters, Fox. And what I really loved about that news coverage is not just that it shone a light on the vascular bipolar connection, but people were talking about youth bipolar disorder in all of these settings. So I think it was really a real double benefit. I wanted to present to you a number of other snapshots from our research that exemplify what we can do. So it wouldn't be unusual to be thinking, well, this is kind of adding a negative to a negative, isn't it? Well, I think that there's something negative about heart disease, yes, but I don't think that everything about the heart bipolar connection is negative. And I'll give you some examples of why I think that. So this is work by Cody Kennedy, who's a fourth year PhD student in the audience tonight, finishing his degree in pharmacology with the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder. And what he did was he looked at levels of cholesterol, good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, and then looked at brain structure in teens with and without bipolar disorder. And what he found was if you look at the orange line, what you could see is among youth with bipolar disorder, the higher their bad cholesterol, the smaller the volume of their hippocampus, a region that's fundamental to memory formation, implicated in Alzheimer's disease, known to be associated with vascular risk. So in the teens with bipolar disorder, we saw what we see in middle-aged and elderly adults, higher quote unquote bad cholesterol, smaller hippocampal and other brain region volumes. In the healthy controls, you saw a marginally increased association, but a much weaker association overall. And so what this tells us is that there's a difference in terms of how this biology intersects and interacts with brain among youth with bipolar disorder. And we cannot make the assumption that these connections magically become relevant in one's middle age. We see them as, I think, potentially clinically relevant earlier than that. The other thing that I would note is that we learned from this paper that it was the first study to look at cholesterol and brain structure in youth at all. So this topic, I think the idea of childhood as a period of really good health other than rare diseases has led to an agnosia at not appreciating the fact that heart-brain connections begin when you're born. And so, just a comment to say that there's multiple barriers, not just from psychiatric perspectives, but from the perspective of looking at heart-brain connections in young people. One of the therapeutic approaches we're most interested in is exercise. This is simple survey data where we used an American Academy of Pediatrics self-reported questionnaire about physical activity, looking at recommended benchmarks for working out, moderate to vigorous physical activity, working in, so incidental physical activity like walking or gardening, and sedentary, meaning trying to limit the amount of time we sit. What we found was contemporary youth in general are not meeting the benchmarks, but where the youth with bipolar disorder specifically lagged was moderate to vigorous physical activity. So I mentioned energy metabolism, I mentioned cardiovascular risk. The type of exercise that we believe specifically has the most potential benefits across mind, brain, and body is specifically the type of exercise that youth with bipolar disorder are least likely to engage in. 1 in 20, just by self-report, will tell us they're meeting minimum expected benchmarks, whereas we hope to increase beyond that benchmark and get that number well beyond 1 in 20. In a first study, it took us about 4 years to recruit approximately 120 youth, equally divided between those with and without bipolar disorder. This is an initial analysis from a smaller sample done in collaboration with our longstanding neuroimaging colleague, Brad McIntosh, who's a professor in medical biophysics at the Temerity Faculty of Medicine and based at Sunnybrook. We predicted that, like adults with bipolar disorder, blood flow in the brain would be lower among youth with bipolar disorder. We found the exact opposite. It was elevated, just underscoring the importance of studying youth separately. What we also found was after a single session of aerobic exercise, so 5-minute warm-up, 20 minutes at 70% of maximum, which means a medium intensity workout. You're sweating, you're breathing heavily, but if you're jogging with your friend, you could probably have a short sentences exchange. This is not something that would cause suffering. And then a 5-minute cool down and back to the MRI scanner. What we found was that in the teens with bipolar disorder, there were significant reductions in cerebral blood flow following exercise, to the point that in the post-exercise neuroimaging session, there were no regions in which blood flow in the brain was distinguishable between youth with and without bipolar disorder. So if you will describe that as normalization, I would offer that a single session of exercise temporarily normalizes the cerebral vascular physiology associated with bipolar disorder. So what would a course of exercise do? What would a lifespan of exercise do? The other factor that we found in this study that I use clinically is that if I asked you that youth who had abnormally elevated blood flow and it normalized, how would they feel? I would say that would be the youth who felt great after exercise. It's the exact opposite of what we found. Those youth whose blood flow was most elevated and normalized were the ones that felt most exhausted after exercise. So I'll pull this slide up when talking to youth who don't exercise, who tell me that they're frustrated because everyone will tell them that a run makes you feel great, that they feel happy, and they actually feel lousy. And I'll say, well, listen, I think there's a brain basis for that feeling lousy. My belief is that this is like physiotherapy. You have a certain condition, a predisposition, and with repeated sessions of something that may be uncomfortable at first, you can help your wellness. I know that's a bit of a stretch, but anyway, it's the metaphor that I use. In the same study, we looked at cardiorespiratory fitness. So these youth were on a recumbent exercise bicycle. We had their heart rate, and we looked at the amount of power they could generate on this recumbent cycle at a fixed heart rate. And we found, using that proxy of aerobic or cardiorespiratory fitness, while there's overlap, on average, youth with bipolar disorder have lower aerobic fitness than youth without bipolar disorder. Why is that important in the future from a physical perspective? In the here and now, the lower the youth's aerobic fitness, the more severe the depression was at this time. And this was constrained in particular to girls. So the interrelationship between lower aerobic fitness and more severe depression appears to be sex or gender related. And I would offer that this invokes the need for sex and gender specific intervention approaches. A theme that's been at the core of the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder has been research collaborations. And I just want to walk through and take my time on this one and talk about just the community that's involved here. So we have heart and vessel imaging, I think the least likely things to be paired with bipolar disorder for most people, including cardiac MRI, including looking at the aorta and the main blood vessel that comes off of the heart and looking at its physiologic properties, photographs of the eye that looks at blood vessels, et cetera, et cetera. Looking at dialectical behavior therapy, an intervention initially designed for individuals with borderline personality disorder to calm and quell the chaos of living with that condition that's been modified for youth and modified for bipolar disorder under the leadership of Tina Goldstein. We've had clinical trials at the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder and have 2 ongoing right now, looking at next generation DBT therapies. I'll talk about that in a moment. Colleagues at Sunnybrook, Rachel Mitchell and Samina Toma, who've partnered with us through the years, medical imaging, retinal imaging with ophthalmology, anesthesiology, which I'll provide you with some context, Currently, the department chair is Beverly Orser, and she's been our longstanding collaborator for, I think, about 8 years. Genetics and biomarkers, this is really an area that we hope to catapult forward on. We spent over a decade accumulating a data set that included very complex and nuanced, what we call phenotyping, detailed characterization about family history, medical history, symptoms, neurocognition, et cetera. And now we have enough individuals, and with the collaboration of Jim Kennedy and others, Vanessa Gonçalves, we can look at genetics, at the genetics of the mitochondria as well, and try to get an understanding of heritability, brain effect, et cetera. Biostatistics, I mentioned Boris Burmaher and also our colleague David Miklowitz, and also brain imaging colleagues. I mentioned Brad McIntosh and also Sandra Black, who's a renowned behavioral neurologist and stroke neurologist who I have to credit for championing our approach since the inception of the idea of the vascular bipolar connection. And Sandra would say to me through the years, she said, this is really several years ahead, and she faced similar challenges when she talked about bringing vascular considerations into Alzheimer's, which is at the time seen as really kind of out there. So this has really enabled us to, I think, make a lot more progress than we could have on our own. Our icon is heart bipolar disorder, and I'll explain the motto in a moment, but what do you see in this picture? What it tells you is, I think, I was sitting in this session, and I was obviously at the perspective of the head of the table looking at, and I thought, wow, are these people dedicated and are they focused? What are they doing? They're listening to an audio tape of an interview, and they're putting down their scores for our quarterly inter-rater reliability testing. And you might think, well, this is an onerous task, a boring task. It's not even in front of a patient. You're listening to the patient. And I was just struck by, how important this sort of thing is. And why do we take it so seriously? One is because people have told us their stories, and we take those stories seriously. The other thing is that we're not joking around. We want to advance understanding through biology. And if we don't have real careful characterization of the symptoms of bipolar disorder and the psychological manifestations, how can we possibly hope to map that onto biology? A real emphasis for me and for the center has been cultivating the next generation. So I came into this area fascinated with the controversy, really drawn to it. And it was a really small cadre of individuals. And so I thought there was also room potentially for me. And unfortunately, there's even been a reduction in the number of dedicated investigators in this topic. So we're really committed to trying to increase bandwidth, the human capital that is going towards this topic. So here you see Wendy, Michaela, Cody, Alicia, and Megan. Alicia just finished her PhD last fall and is with us as a postdoctoral fellow. And all others on this slide are finishing their PhDs this year. So our hope is that over time, there are more of us doing this work and can do more faster. This is a cartoon that brings together our understanding of bipolar disorder, at least our snapshot lens of it, which is to say, people ask, is it bipolar first or the vessel problems first? We only define bipolar disorder as bipolar disorder because that's how we define it. We look at symptoms, count numbers of symptoms, duration of symptoms, impacts of symptoms. But is that the cause of the disease, or is it the manifestation of the disease? So we look at bipolar disorder as in part a disease that is vascular in its genesis. And it's for that reason, to make that argument, like that may resonate with you, may resonate with our team, but for a lot of people, it seems, odd. And so what we look at is brain imaging measures of blood vessels, eye measures of blood vessels, heart measures of blood vessels, and blood vessel functioning in the fingertips. Bring all of these together to share the idea that not only is bipolar disorder a brain disease, not just in your head, but it's also a body disease. And if this is true, it would suggest the need for intervention approaches that are currently not in use. I mentioned exercise. We had the support of Brain Canada to do a behavior change counseling intervention to help youth with bipolar disorder exercise more and become more aerobically fit. It included motivation enhancement, direct measurement of physical activity, and then a la carte aspects like a personal exercise coach who would go to one's home, who would meet them in a local park, family focus sessions, peer support sessions. We found that youth would have finished the study, but they didn't really change their behavior and they didn't really change their fitness. So we're going to redouble our efforts and listen to them, which is they told us, just tell us what to do and when, which was something we had been reluctant to do, but now we're going to listen and try to create more of a structured approach, integrating with a supportive counseling approach. In terms of DBT next steps, we're looking at expanding its uses to a broader spectrum of symptoms. Right now, DBT is a full year of weekly sessions. Not everybody needs that. So can we modify it to give a handful of sessions, to give a dozen sessions? And so we have this stratified adaptive design, which means the extent of how much someone gets DBT sessions will depend on their need or their preference, and it'll adapt to changes in their conditions and dose up, if you will, as needed. And this is work inspired by Tina Goldstein and led by Jessica Rohn, Danielle Omren, and Vanessa Rajamani from our group, who are both registered social workers and research coordinators at the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder. I mentioned nitrous oxide. This is an anesthetic, and you might wonder about its place in psychiatry. This is a cousin to ketamine, which is an intervention, also an anesthetic, known to reduce suicidality and to reduce depression in highly treatment refractory cases. But nitrous oxide has had preliminary evidence showing the same. It's a medicine that is an anesthetic, but it also affects cerebral blood flow. And so for that reason, and in fact, it was initially used as a vascular probe, meaning a medication that people would take so that the initial neuroimaging could be completed. So as you can see here, Bevorser and others, and we've done a study in adults, which we studied adults first because we thought Health Canada would forbid us or ban us if we started with 16-year-olds, but we are definitely going there as the next step and look forward to doing that in collaboration with the Temerity Center at CAMH. And finally, returning to these messages of hope. Keep going, keep growing, be patient, you're healing. When you fall down, get back up again. This is the type of thing that we want plastered on our walls, that we want in people's minds when they're going through rough times, knowing that someone else has been there. And we look forward to augmenting that with this excellent booklet that Adam and others in our group are going to be spearheading. So to us, the heart not only represents dedication and care, but it is a symbol that bipolar disorder is linked to cardiovascular risk and affects mind, brain, and body. And I hope that you take home this message, that you share it in your discourse with others, that if you hear skepticism, you have a little bit of information you can draw from. I wanted to acknowledge primarily, first and foremost, our patients. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to work with them, to work on their behalf, to be inspired by them, who have given us their time, and their families who have entrusted us with this responsibility. We're supported substantially by CAMH Discovery Fund, which is a philanthropic effort. I'm supported by RBC Investments for a chair. The Copland family recently has supported us as well. We've received donations in memory of Norman Reisman, an advocate for the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder, previously an anonymous donor, the Great Gulf Foundation and the Michael Albert Guerin Foundation, as well as funding agencies. I have to acknowledge Dr. Anthony Levitt for enabling the Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder to be started at Sunnybrook and for supporting us and helping us to launch, and to Vicky Sturgiopoulos for bringing us to CAMH with the support of Catherine Zahn and allowing us this opportunity to do more of what we love doing. And we hope that we will earn that investment and return on it. So thank you for your attention.